All right, in this section now we're going to move on and talk about St. Thomas Aquinas' famous 5 arguments for the existence of God, the 5 ways as it's found in Aquinas' most well-known work, the Summa Theologiae. It's important to know that this particular work, the Summa Theologiae, was written for beginners in theology. He says that right in the beginning of the work. This is for beginners in theology. Now you have to realize that a beginner in theology in his day is someone who is just starting theology, yes, but they've already underwent a long period of study in philosophy, because philosophy is a preparation for learning theology. So these aren't beginners in the absolute sense. These are guys who have studied philosophy and now are ready to move on to study theology. And the point is that they've already had some philosophical training. Now, the reason I want to make this point is because these 5 ways, these 5 proofs for arguing for the existence of God are not meant to be taken as completely spelled out in every detail. These are short summaries. He's just kind of given a quick little example of 5 different arguments by which we can know that God exists. So, in other words, these arguments here, they're very short. They're not fully developed. They presuppose a lot of things, and he presupposes that his reader, those beginners in theology who have studied philosophy, already know a lot of these philosophical concepts that are being used here in these arguments. And so a lot of this, to get the full effect of these arguments, you have to know a lot of philosophy. You have to know a lot about St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy than what's included just in these little short summaries, these short little arguments, these short little summaries. And I want to bring this up because it happens all the time. You'll take a college class in the philosophy of religion, and they'll kind of cut and paste St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs and stick them in there, and it just really rips them out of context and uses them in a way that Aquinas didn't intend for them to be used. These are just short summaries. They aren't like ready-made, all spelled out in every detail to go to the modern day unbeliever. That was not his audience. Now, this is not to say, however, that these arguments don't succeed. I think they do. I think these are good arguments. I just think they need some more explanation and more elaboration than what is contained right there in the text of the 5 ways themselves. And I've actually defended some of these arguments in my other works. So I'm not going to go into a deep elaboration of these arguments here. But what I want to do is kind of just introduce you to these 5 proofs for the existence of God and kind of just get you started. I want to give you just a little bit of initial help in understanding them. And as I've said before, all these proofs start from some sensible effect in the world, and then in further there must be some kind of cause behind that effect that merits the name of God. So let's look at each one of these 5 ways. The first way goes like this. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now by motion here, Aquinas just means change. Now whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. For nothing can be in motion except as it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus that which is actually hot, as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. Now it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. It is therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way a thing should be both mover and moved, that is, that it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. Therefore it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. So basically this first way is arguing that all motion, and just by that Aquinas means change, all motion must ultimately come from something that is itself unmoved, an unmoved first mover that we have good reason to think is God. So the basic idea, the analogy he gives is like a stick. Maybe think of a stick moving a rock, right? The rock is moving, the rock is able to move because the stick, actualizes that power, actualizes that potency in the rock, right? So the stick moves the rock. But then why is the stick moving? Because the hand is actualizing the potency of the stick to move, right? So the hand's making the stick move, stick's making the rock move. But why is the hand moving? And the idea here is that you can't have an infinite regress of dependence here. There can't be an infinite regress of movers that you would have to arrive at something that is first, an unmoved mover that everyone calls God. We're not going to go into all the details of this argument here because it is very elaborate. Aquinas does go into much more detail about this argument in his work, the Summa Theologiae. So we're not going to get into all that here. But I would like you to see how it relates to the next argument here in the 5 ways, the second way of proving God's existence, which is the way of the efficient cause. And it reads like this. The second way is from the nature of the efficient cause. In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following an order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate is the cause of the ultimate cause, whether the intermediate cause be several or only one. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause, neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. All right, so basically what's going on here is that Aquinas says there has to be a first cause for the existence of all things that depend on another for their existence, and everyone gives this cause the name of God. Now, let me just say something here about the impossibility of an infinite regress, because Aquinas makes use of this idea in both the first way and the second way, the idea that we can't have an infinite regress of causes. We have to arrive at a first of some sorts, whether it's a first mover or a first cause, either way. Aquinas thinks an infinite regress of causes is impossible. Now, what I want you to understand is that when Aquinas says this, when he says an infinite regress of causes is impossible, he's not thinking of something that goes just horizontally back in time. That's kind of the way we usually think of causes and effects, as kind of going backwards in time like this, a sort of horizontal line like this, that time has to have a beginning, or that the world, the physical world, has to have a beginning in time. He's not thinking of a first cause like that. He's not thinking of a first cause where the world had to begin to exist in time. And the reason why is because Thomas Aquinas didn't think that one could philosophically prove that the world had to begin to exist at some point in the past. Other philosophers thought you could. Aquinas didn't think so. Aquinas thought that God, if he wanted to, God could have created an infinitely old world. God could have created a world that never had a beginning. If God wanted to do that, he could. Now, he doesn't think God actually did that because theological teachings, Revelation tells us that the world had a beginning. Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this is something that we can know from theology that we can't know, according to Aquinas, from philosophy. Human reason can't tell us that the world had to begin to exist in time, but theology can. Nevertheless, Aquinas says, even if the world were eternally old, still it would need God as a cause. So the question really is irrelevant of how old the world is. Did the world begins at some finite point in the past, or is it eternally old? Aquinas says it doesn't matter. We can still reason to the existence of God either way. Think of it this way. Suppose you're at an intersection and you see a train moving across the road, all right? And someone were to ask, why is this boxcar right in front of you? Why is it moving? Well, someone might say, well, it's moving because the one in front of it, boxcar number 2, is pulling it. All right? But of course, the same question arises there. Why is boxcar number 2 moving? And someone might say, well, because the boxcar in front of it, boxcar 3, is pulling that one, you see. But of course, we aren't making much progress here, right? We aren't making much progress in finding the cause, the real cause of why these boxcars are moving, because these are the kinds of things that are dependent on another for their motion. You see, boxcars don't move by themselves. Somewhere along the line in this train, there has to be something that moves by itself, like a train engine, right? And even on a weird hypothesis, suppose there are just an infinite number of boxcars, right? Even on that hypothesis, still over and above the train, there would have to be something moving all those boxcars, because again, boxcars don't move by themselves. They only move because something else moves them. So if you took out the main train engine that pulls everything and just say it's, boxcars all the way down the track, if that's moving, still there would have to be something over and above that train itself somehow moving all those boxcars. Well, the same thing goes here. Okay, the same thing goes here. Just like boxcars are the kinds of things that depend on another for their motion, these dependent beings, these cause things, depend on another for their existence. And you can't have just an infinite regress of those things if there is not something that is independent for its existence that doesn't have to depend on something else, you see. And so just like, piling up boxcars to infinity, that doesn't explain why the boxcars are moving. In the same way, piling up cause things, piling up effects to infinity doesn't explain their existence either. Even if those dependent effects extended infinitely back into the historic past, still the whole dependent historic series would have to depend on something outside of it. You would have to go upwards in a sense. So think of it this way. Think of it, let X here represent now, all the things that exist now, and we're going, and then the cause of all the things that exist now would be here, and we're kind of just working our way backwards horizontally, you see, in time. Right? And time is running this way. And let's suppose on the hypothesis that the world never began. All right? So the things, the material finite things go back to infinity in this horizontal temporal series. Well, even if that's the case, this is just like these kind of things here that are dependent on their existence. That's just like the boxcars that are dependent on their motion, you see. Why do the things here exist? Well, because these things cause them, but these things themselves are effects. That's just like adding in another boxcar, you see. So you're just piling up dependent, contingent things. Doesn't matter how many you add in, there would have to be something over and above this historic series that would cause the whole thing to exist. That is Aquinas' whole point, that even if it were the case that the world never began, still there would have to be something over and above all of these dependent things in the world to account for their existence. That's basically how this argument works. And if you want more on this, I defend this argument in great detail in my course, How to Prove God Exists, the Thomistic Cosmological Argument. It's available at my website at scottimsullivan.com. So let's move on then to the third way. The third way is taken from possibility and necessity and runs thus. We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and to corrupt, and consequently they are possible to be and not to be. But it is impossible for these things always to exist, for that which is possible not to be at some time is not. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. Now, if this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, if at any time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist, and thus even now nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. But every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. Now, it is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient causes. Therefore, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity. This all men speak of as God. So this third way is arguing now that there has to be a necessary being in order to account for the existence of all these things that can either be or not be, right? There has to be this necessary being in order to account for the existence of contingent beings. So I think you can see a familiar line of reasoning here with these first three ways. There has to be a first mover, a first cause, or a necessary being. Let's move on then to the fourth way. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. Among beings there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. But more and less are predicated of different things, according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum, as a thing is said to be hotter, according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. So that there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest, and consequently something which is uttermost being. For those things that are greatest in truth are greatest in being, as is written in the Metaphysics, Book 2. Now the maximum in any genus is the cause of all in that genus, as fire, which is the maximum heat, is the cause of all hot things. Therefore there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. Now this fourth way here is the most difficult to understand of all the five ways, and honestly it's even a matter of controversy amongst Thomistic scholars, so space does not allow us to go into all the different difficult details here. The argument is basically saying that in order for one thing to be better than another, more true than another, or have more being than another, that implies something that presupposes something that is the highest good, the highest truth, or the highest being that is the cause of all those other perfections. Let's move on then and talk about the fifth way. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end. And this is evident from their acting always, or nearly always, in the same way so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously, but designedly do they achieve their end. Now whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. Now this is an example of the famous design argument in philosophy. It's also called the teleological argument for the existence of God. There are a lot of versions of this argument in the history of philosophy. I think Aquinas' version here is pretty unique. The basic idea is that there is order in the universe, and we can know that because things are ordered and that they act in regular and lawful ways. They do this either always or for the most part, as he says. And these things act in a way that is directed towards an end or goal. And since they are unintelligent, they can't do that by themselves. And the only way these unintelligent things can act for goals is if something intelligent directed them, just like an archer directs an arrow to its target. So Aquinas is saying here that the order of the universe has to be explained by some intelligence that directs and orders all these things. And since this is what a lot of people mean by the term God, we can also say that this argument too shows that God exists. Now, if you want more on this argument, I defend this argument in great detail in my course, The Design Argument for the Existence of God. So in any case, these are the famous 5 ways that Aquinas shows that God exists. And again, I want to emphasize that you have to remember the context of these arguments. They're difficult to understand, for sure. He's not writing to the average Joe here. Okay? He's writing to beginners in theology that have already underwent a lot of training in philosophy. So he's presupposing a lot of knowledge in his audience here. These aren't meant to be just, taken by some brand new beginner and just, oh, okay, I get everything. It doesn't work like that. They're summaries, and they're directed to a particular educated audience, an audience that knows some philosophy. So they are very brief. There's a lot going on, under the hood that's not discussed here in these particular texts. So Aquinas, I think, never intended these arguments to be, full-blown arguments that explained every detail right there and that you could just kind of cut and paste and then give to some modern-day atheist. That would not do them justice, I don't think. That would be unfair to Aquinas because he has a lot more to say about these arguments than what he says right here in these brief summaries.